Hello, everybody. And here we are on day 5 of Big Talk for Quiet People. And I'm so excited to have our special guest on today. But before I introduce her, I'd like to just share a quick disclaimer, which is that I'd love you all to remember that introversion varies widely among individuals, and that the experiences and approaches we discuss are not, of course, one size fits all. And we know that introversion is on a continuum. But hopefully, the things we discuss today will offer valuable perspectives for many people. So, with that done, I'd love to introduce our guest today. And her name is Munia. And I'm just finding the little page that I've got with all her background information. So Munia Birada Guzi, I believe, but she will correct me when she comes on if I've said that wrongly. And Munia is a multilingual event moderator. She's a facilitator. She's a people enabler. And she specializes in moderating international business events and interactive discussion-based sessions. She has a multicultural background. She is German and Moroccan. She studied in the UK. She lived in Spain and France, and has a background in banking, HR development, and personal development coaching. And I met Munia at an event. She was moderating an event that I was speaking at. And we got on really well. We've connected a few times since then. And I thought she'd be a wonderful person to bring on today because she, as a moderator, sees all sorts of speakers. She runs panels regularly, round tables. And there's this idea among many introverts that we don't make good speakers. We don't make good presenters. Excuse me, it's not really the thing that we do well. And I kind of brought Munia on because I wanted to have her share her views and also dispel this myth that as an introvert, you cannot really excel as a speaker or as a presenter. And then also just kind of draw some distinctions between the different kinds of speaking we can do and the ways that we can succeed. So I'll be interviewing Munia for part of this. She'll be interviewing me because I want to share my own views as well as a professional speaker. And yeah, so lots of preamble there. But Munia, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a delight. And Munia volunteered. When I told Munia I was thinking to do this series, well, you're here, right? You volunteered. And I really appreciate that. And I said, well, you can't just interview me. I need to get some intel from you as well.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this because it's usually me who interviews people, and I never actually share my opinion. So I'm like, oh, okay, I get to talk.
You do. And what I really liked about the way that you moderated the panels that I watched you moderate is that a lot of moderators they want to make it about them. So because they're moderating, but they feel they've got lots to add, they either have their own kind of ramble where they kind of try and show that they know loads about the topic, and are a little bit heavy-handed, I guess, in terms of how they manage the panel and when and how they allow people to speak. And what I really loved about your work, Munia, is that you really had a sensitivity to making sure that it was balanced, that everybody had enough opportunity to speak, that you, while showing that you clearly knew and done your research for the event in hand, you had a really nice balance between showing that you knew what you were talking about and asking intelligent questions, but not trying to hog the limelight, and really making sure that the speakers were able to share their knowledge. So let me just acknowledge you, Munia, for your skills in that department. But let me jump in with the questions I wanted to ask you, because first of all, you doubtless have worked with many different speakers, different kinds of events. What are your thoughts on how introverted versus extroverted speakers perform on stage, as in particular as keynoters, first of all, and then we'll talk about panelists in a moment.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I guess, for me personally, when I see people speak, I don't really label them or see them as, oh, this is definitely an introvert or an extrovert, because you can't always tell actually when you see people perform on stage. Sometimes you can. I think this depends very much on the experience. How much experience has this person had speaking publicly? So I want to say that I think introverts can be brilliant speakers. In fact, I would say that they can actually be the better speakers. From the introverted speakers that I have witnessed on stage, some of them have been very experienced and they speak on stage regularly. So you can't really tell unless you then go off stage and you can get the feel that they're actually introverted. And then there's the introverts that I've seen that, are more maybe experts in a large organization. They have to hold a keynote and they don't usually do that. So I think the differences are that people who are more introverted tend to be more nervous, and you can tell when they are on stage if they don't have as much speaking experience. Yeah, so they don't really love a lot of improvisation. They don't really they want to have everything planned out because that's how they feel more comfortable. Having said that, though, I think these are things that come with experience. So the more you speak, the more comfortable you do get with unforeseen situations. I love introverted speakers because I think that they are there not for the limelight. They're not there to feed off the audience like a lot of extroverts do. They are, in many ways, because they're more connected to themselves, they're more self-observing, they're more real, they're more authentic in many ways. And I think that's hugely powerful, especially these days where people are overwhelmed with performances and stimulation. They want that realness. So I think introverts have got a lot to add. They're usually very well prepared. So they know their stuff and they can add real value. I've seen introverts do kind of demos and really walk people through a practical case. And that was so powerful because they used things like videos and images and a story that they were telling, and it was very powerful. So all in all, I would say that I think introverts are really great speakers and can be powerful speakers, and that there doesn't have to be this distinction, but that they are often less confident at the beginning when they're not used to speaking. So I'm going to stop there.
What an interesting response. And I know personally, and we'll talk about my experiences a bit more in a moment, but I know personally, and I, as a speaker, but also somebody who was a professional entertainer for more than a decade, and my partner would come to my gigs and things with me, and he'd always say, "Oh, you excited about going on stage?" And the answer was never, ever, ever, "Yes, I can't wait to have these, 100,000, whatever, eyeballs on me." Never, ever. It was always, "I'm excited to maybe interpret this song in a different way, or to give these people some sort of experience because they've come out and they want to have a good time, or feel some emotion through the music." And it's the same for speaking. I mean, if it was all about, right, I'm just going to be seen, man, wow, I can't wait, I wouldn't be doing this right now. So I really appreciate that comment that you have around perhaps introverts working hard to make their presentations interesting, varied, whatever, maybe through multimedia or mixed media and so on, because it's not all about them taking the being in the limelight. And there's an element of wanting to serve and serving through delivering through presentations, panels, whatever, rather than this is the be all and end all because I just want people to see me. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I think introverts are too hard on themselves with how they see themselves. And I'm somebody who likes to keep away from labels either way. So as soon as you label yourself as, oh, I'm this, I'm that, you start to replicate that in your mind, because the mind is a very powerful tool. So if you keep telling yourself, well, I'm an introvert and that's why I'm not a good speaker, and that's why, you ought to start to kind of have like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think that no matter what you are, at the end of the day, it's about being human and about understanding what is speaking actually about. It's not about proving yourself. It's not about getting validation or doing things the right way. It is about sharing your experience. It is about connection and about facilitating learning for people in the room. And anyone can do that, no matter whether they're introverted or extroverted. And another last thing I wanted to say, I read and I was surprised that Barack Obama is an introvert. And he is one of the most powerful speakers. He walks into the room and he's captivating. So what does he do? Well, he does it a lot, he just has a lot of experience. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting talking about him, because I went to an event once and there was another speaker who was a speaker trainer, and he was talking about meeting a woman called Patsy Rodenberg, who's a kind of very well known. I think she has worked with a lot of famous actors and actresses, and this was before Barack Obama was really famous. And this Patsy Rodenberg was off to work with Barack Obama, because apparently he was a rising star in the Democratic Party, but his speaking was shaky, like he didn't have it all connected yet. So she was flying off to Chicago, or wherever it was, to meet with him to then, elevate his speaking skills. So it just shows that everyone can do with a little bit of help here and there.
Absolutely.
So what about panels then, Munia? What would you say about people's performance as panelists? Is there a difference? I have a very interesting take on the difference between panels and keynotes, which I'll talk about after this. But what do you think in terms of performance?
I would say that introverts are the ones who dominate the least. They're usually more quiet. And I think with panels, it really depends on the moderator again, because if you've got a moderator who's very much attuned, then the introverts get an equal amount of airtime, so they don't have to fight for it. So introverts won't fight for being heard. They'll be quiet, and if they have I would say maybe not a skilled moderator, they might not get to say very much. And I think that is much more down to the moderator to manage than the introvert, because they're a guest and they should be treated as equals. So I wouldn't say there is a massive difference in terms of style. Obviously, introverts are more, perhaps they take longer to come up with answers. They reflect about things. They sometimes don't make that eye contact with the audience when they're speaking. So they kind of, they have that one-on-one with you on a panel without looking at the audience. But that's actually just a skill, because it's not natural for us to be looking at an audience when we're having a conversation. So, but what do you think, actually? I'd love to hear your experience with panels, and whether you think there's a big difference between panels and being a keynote speaker.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference. And I love what you said about the moderator playing a big role in terms of whether an introvert is successful on a panel or not. Because one of the things I loved about keynoting when I first, or speaking when I first started, was as an introvert, many of us tend to, in conversation, we tend to acquiesce a lot to extroverts. So we might have something to say, but as soon as there are people around us who are a bit more animated and speak a bit faster or get in their ideas more quickly, quite often we just sort of, oh, all right then, it's going at a pace that's a bit too fast for me, I can't interject, etc. So when I started first doing speaker training and realized, oh, I've got 7 minutes to speak uninterrupted, what the heck, this is amazing, right? That was a big part of my attraction to being a speaker. And it still is, because you have a chance to really express your ideas, to think things through before you have to get up on stage and so on. However, as a panelist, it's a different story. And I remember the first panel that I did was quite a high profile one. So my first book had come out, How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking. I got a chance to do a panel at an event for Marie Claire, and there was somebody on who is quite a well-known influencer, and she's very, very extroverted, super extroverted. And so the questions would come along and I would go and answer my question. And before I'd finished, this super high energy extrovert would butt in, just pick up what I was saying and just kind of grab it and take it for herself. Literally, I just really, really struggled to express any of my opinions. And the moderator, to my mind, could have done a much better job in terms of holding at bay, you know, this woman, so that I had a chance to fully express my ideas. And I felt that I performed very poorly, and I felt kind of embarrassed. And it actually, at the end, a couple of audience members even came up and they kind of patted me on the shoulder and said, "Oh gosh, that was a bit full on, wasn't it? Oh, she spoke a lot, you know." So it wasn't just me, you know, it was actually recognized by the audience, even though they were sympathetic about it. And what I did, for a while, I always turned down panels. And then I thought, you know what? I need to, because sometimes it's an opportunity and they won't have you as a keynoter. You just have to kind of get your few words in as a panelist. So then I thought, okay, I need to have an implementation plan for how I can succeed at this panel. And so I said to myself, all right, then, well, I can't change who I am, but anytime there's a question that comes to me and somebody just like steals the time away and I can't finish, the next time I'm asked, I will say, yeah, happy to answer that. But first, let me just continue my point from before, because I didn't quite finish. And I made sure that every single time I just did that. And so what it did for me is it made me feel a lot calmer, because I knew that some way, somehow I would finish. And it made me feel more prepared. And again, I didn't come across poorly, because now I was actually able to finish every response. So that was my strategy. But I feel that it's quite tough as an introvert to be in panels, and if the moderator is a bit not rubbish, but if the moderator is insensitive, it can really come off poorly for the introverts. I see you nodding, Minu.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had that experience. I don't think anyone should have that experience, to be very honest. And I would challenge the moderator, not because I am one myself, but because a panel, you know, the kind of chair of that panel is the moderator. They are in charge of both the guests, the panelists, and the audience. That is their job, to make sure that everybody is seen and heard. And so I guess the only tip I would have is, if you are going to be on a panel, make sure you meet the moderator in advance. So not at the event, but a couple of weeks before, set up a virtual call where you can actually see them and sense what kind of person they are, and express your concerns to them if you feel comfortable. Say, you know, like, how would you handle such a situation? Could you make sure that, you know, people don't interrupt? So be clear about your needs. I would say, and also the opportunity to perhaps meet with the panelists in advance, so that you can get to know them a little bit better. You can get to understand what their points are. But I think this kind of experience that you had really comes down to, I don't want to be judgmental, but it's poor moderation skill. Absolutely. The moderator should have set rules and said, you know, hang on, Shola hasn't quite finished. They should have had a sense for your uncomfortableness, and that clearly didn't happen. So there's not much that you can do as a panelist apart from do what you did. For example, say, well, I would like to just continue my trail of thought, or you could do something a little bit cheeky. Just raise your hand. Raise your hand. Why are you raising your hand? Well, you know, I was about to continue my trail of thought, but I'd like to just go back to what I said. I guess I wouldn't say be bold, but try those kinds of things that are a little bit more unconventional.
Yeah, good advice. Because I think for introverts as well, it can seem distasteful to butt in, because it's. I know that many people have no problem with it, or they'll talk over you or whatever. But it's actually and again, I'm not speaking for every introvert, but there's just like a distaste, or like, oh, there's no way I could. And it's not even from fear, but it just seems like sort of low down, dirty behaviour to kind of butt in when somebody else is speaking. And the only time I have done that is when I was with another introvert and an extrovert, and the extrovert, a lovely person, but just kept talking over the other introvert, and I felt on her behalf, there's no way, I want to hear from this person. So then I would kind of cut in on the extrovert who was speaking just to hear the other person. I wouldn't do it for myself, but I think I was my sense of propriety was kind of violated when I saw this extrovert do it for the introvert. So yeah, I think it just doesn't feel good to us to interrupt. And you'll have extrovert communicators or communication coaches saying things like, well, just if you, when you're ready to speak, just speak up, just talk over them, they'll go quiet. But there's just this real, like, there's no way I can do that, there's no way, it's wrong, it feels wrong.
I guess in that case, I mean, there are ways if you're not comfortable interrupting, but you could say, sorry, I hadn't quite finished yet, or would you be able to let me finish my sentence? You can say that in a quiet, calm way. It doesn't have to be aggressive. Raise your hand, or I guess again, it is down to the moderator at the end of the day. But I would say, don't fear panels. Don't fear them. You have an equal voice and an equal say. People want to hear what you have to say, but I guess you have to be able to have that space to be heard, and that does come down to the moderator at the end of the day.
I think another thing that came up about panels, and we were talking with Emma Louise, who talks about energy management for ambitious introverts, and she was saying that many of the introverts she works with, they feel that unless they've got something really different or profound or important to say, they will much rather not say anything. And I tend to have this view, and it's not always true, but that on panels, the level of the discussion is much more superficial than in a keynote. And that's another reason for me. Sometimes the variety is great, and if you don't want to go too into something, it's quite fun to watch a panel. But as someone who has a choice to be a panelist or a keynoter, I don't want to be sort of sound bites and, right, yeah, I've got 2 seconds, or not 2 seconds, but 30 seconds to talk about something that could be spoken about over the duration of a whole keynote. So I'm not here to kind of say that panels are bad and keynotes are good, but again, I think that could be another reason for hesitation when it comes to introverts considering whether to go on a panel or not.
I personally, I am not a huge fan of panels because I don't think they add that much value. And if you would ask the audience, a lot of the time people will tell you, quietly, confidently, when you're talking in a small, lost my words, after the event, right? I've had conversations with audience members where they said, oh, I don't really like panels. So I don't think panels are actually the best format for anyone, really, because as I say, they usually just skim the surface, and we could do with shortened formats that are more interactive. So again, if you do get the chance to be on a panel, try to manage the situation in advance. But I just don't think that panels are the best format to really dive into a topic and really have everybody heard, including the audience as well.
Yeah. How interesting to hear you say that. I guess maybe in terms of when somebody runs an event, they feel that by having a few panels, it's a way to just get more faces up on stage, or more sponsors involved, or whatever it might be. But yeah, interesting. And I guess also, if you do have a speaker who's not great and they've got 40 minutes, then it could be a spectacular fail rather than a panel where at least you'd hope that 1 or 2 people are half decent on the panel. So yeah. Interesting. Okay, so let's move on from that. That took a long time. That is quite an interesting discussion. As a facilitator, you have to respond quickly and in the moment to what happens on stage, often in front of a lot of people. And do you have any advice? How do you prepare for just being in the moment like that? And do you have any advice for others?
I think the short answer is I don't prepare for moments like that because you can't prepare for uncertainty. You have to learn to be comfortable with uncertainty. And I know that people are going to go, oh, don't want to hear that. But to be honest, I learned through trial and error. I had some moments that were really quite scary where I was completely out of my depth, didn't know what to do. And I learned through that. So I would say, remember that things can happen, things will go wrong and can go wrong. Try to make yourself as comfortable with that as possible. Now, depending on what can go wrong, there could be so many things, but let's say the classical things like the clicker doesn't work, the mic doesn't work, or you have a blank. There is things that you can do in advance to prepare yourself. For example, one of the things is just mental preparation, to just take a breath and play with pauses. So say the clicker doesn't work. People, a lot of time, introverts, they get very nervous. They go, oh, the clicker's not working. You could just be vulnerable and say, oh, the clicker's not working. Apologize. Could somebody in the tech team help me? To prepare for something like that, you could always have cards, physical cards, where you've got your notes so that in case the clicker doesn't work, you've got something to hold on to, right? If you have a blank, for example, it's one of the biggest fears of a lot of people. What could you do? Well, taking a breath, breathing and stopping, and just either using words like so, and, you know, pausing, right? Or admitting defeat and saying, I can't believe I just forgot what I wanted to say. I'm sure it must have happened to you here in the audience, right? It's such an embarrassing thing to happen. Admit, make yourself vulnerable, slow the pace down of your speaking. Because I've noticed that when people speak too fast, they will often lose touch with what they wanted to say. So connecting back to your body through a breath, verbalizing that you just lost the plot, making a joke out of it will make you human, it will make you relatable, and I think it's very powerful. But I don't know what you mean with and again, this is a question to you, you know, speaking in front of a large audience, preparing for the unforeseen. Maybe you have a particular example that you wanted some input on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's true about speaking slowly. And I tend to speak fast. And I really have to think to myself, slow down, slow down. And I did one yesterday and I was speaking purposely really a lot slower. And it was easier. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think, oh, I've got this energy, I want to convey that. So sometimes I do allow myself to speak faster. But what you were saying just now was making me think about this idea that we often want to look good when we're on stage, and what's in our head is got to look good, got to look good, and then that stops us from being present. And as a result of that, then when we're not present, if something goes wrong, it has a much bigger impact than if we're in the moment. And I remember I did a talk at the Royal College of Engineers in front of maybe 200 or 300 people, and there was a gap. They'd obviously put up a temporary stage, and there was a gap between the wall behind us and the stage, and there was a curtain, so you couldn't see there was a gap. So I went and stood, and stood near the wall, and of course my foot just went into the gap, and I kind of fell over. And it's like, when you've got a baby and the baby falls over, they're learning to walk and they fall over, and then they look at the mum or the dad, and depending on the mum and dad's response, they either laugh or they start crying. And as I fell back, you could see the audience looking at me, and they're like, how is she going to respond?
Yeah.
And I just laughed. I said, oh, goodness me, and then just carried on. And then they kind of sighed, and we just continued on. Whereas if I'd had this moment of, oh my God, I didn't look good, they'd have spotted that, and it makes them uncomfortable as well. So I think in terms of going back to the MO for introverts in terms of when they're speaking and it being about being of service, again, if you're thinking, well, how can I make sure my audience is feeling at ease? anything that you experience, they're going to experience as well. So again, take yourself away from this. I've got to look good. Da, da, da. Okay, something happened, went slightly wrong. I want them to feel good. So I have to feel good and get over this really fast. So that's my kind of way of dealing with things that go poorly.
I think if you don't mind, I have a question for you about that. Bigger audiences as well, as we were speaking about, because obviously we want to hear your input as well. And I know we don't have that much time, or we could go over, couldn't we?
Yeah, right.
You know, speaking about, you know, large audiences, I would be curious, like, what motivates you to speak in front of large audiences, given your introversion? Are there any empowering ways, apart from what you just mentioned, right, that introverts can perhaps reframe their experience in front of large audiences?
Yes, yeah. I think so if you're not really turned on by having loads of eyeball on you, which I think is the case for many, many introverts, you've got to start thinking, well, what's in it for me? So let's say that at work, maybe you're not a professional speaker, but maybe at work you have a chance to speak at a big conference or so I think first of all, you've got to think, well, what's in it for me? Is this worth doing? If it is worth doing, then you've got to try and extract as much goodness from it, you know, from the process, so that you enjoy everything leading up to it and you're not dreading, oh my gosh, you know, countdown, right, day 60, day 59, whatever it might be. So so for me, I often think about, oh, okay, this is exciting, it's a chance to be creative. So that will help me think about, okay, how am I going to package up this information? What are going to be my 3 hooks, let's say, for the audience? So it's a chance to be creative. It's also a chance to be interactive. And when I first started speaking, I thought, gosh, because I started with going to like Toastmasters and public speaking clubs where you might have 5 minutes or 7 minutes to speak, or 20 minutes max. And then when now you've got an hour, or you've maybe even got longer sometimes, it's like, well, how can I face being the center of attention for that amount of time? So then I started to think about, well, what can I do to deflect attention away from me? And so that was the beginnings of me wanting to do interactive speaking, so that the audience had a chance to get involved, whether it was turn to your partner, talk about what I've just discussed, or answer these 3 questions with your partner, or whether it was at the end of each chunk of content, giving a slide for people to reflect upon, and having them, for example, rate yourself on how empathetic you are. Put your hand up. Are you yellow? Are you green? Are you red? And quite often, those moments of reflection are as powerful, if not more so, than the content that you're sharing, because people can forget the content, but they rarely will forget if they have a light bulb moment, or they realize, oh gosh, I need to go back and speak to my child about this thing because our relationship is suffering. Or it's those sorts of impacts that we can have on our audience, which for me really make it worthwhile. And while we may not always hear from the audience in terms of what they've got from that, you have to trust that if you're asking the right questions, coupled with the right information to really get people to dig deep and have some kind of transformation, you can really truly change lives. And I've had people contact me on LinkedIn and say, I'm rushing home right now, I've got to speak to my wife, we've been really struggling, but I see now with this framework or whatever, I can turn things around. Or people nearly in tears, I've had this contact with my child and it's been transformational. So for me, it's about the impact on the individual, and also on the group. But I think sometimes when we look at it as a whole group, it's like, oh, us versus, you know, these 100 people in the audience, me against them, versus each of these people here, they've got something to take away. And so before I do every talk, I'm not religious at all, but I'll say, please let me give these people what they need today. And so then again, it's not about me. It's not about let me look good, let my dress, you know, shine radiantly in the spotlight, right? It's just, let these people take away the thing that they came for. And again, the more you can deflect away from you and think about, I want to do this really well for them, the more you can enjoy the process, I think, as an introvert.
Absolutely. You said some really powerful things. One of them being, that interactive piece as well. I think keynotes, panels, whatever these days, events have to be more interactive. So you've got an advantage there if you're an introvert, if you design your keynote with interaction in mind by using rhetorical questions, asking people to raise their hand. How many of you think that, raise your hand, or what you did, that kind of, I remember that very well in Amsterdam. And I thought, she is the only speaker today who did something interactive. And I think people love that. And so I think there's so much power there for introverts to use that interactive element, that creativity, to create that connection. And then you've solved the problem of, how do I engage my audience? Well, by involving them, asking them questions, asking them to raise their hand and to reflect. And another piece that I think you said that is so true, when we make it less about ourselves and really about being in the now, in the moment, and disconnecting from all of those thoughts of, oh my God, what am I going to do? Oh my God, and really just observe ourselves as this kind of container of energy that's there in that moment. How can I serve? How can I just share? Then we are just so much more at ease with being there. We of course we have the right to be there. It doesn't matter if we're introverted or not. We're just there to share. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think it's so true. And it's interesting because when the pandemic came up, a lot of people who were used to speaking, obviously in person, then had to transition to doing things online. And I had clients say to me that some of their moderators, facilitators, once they had to go online, did, oh, forget it, I don't want to do this anymore. They just kind of checked out and did something else. And I personally love speaking online just because you can actually have a real-time dialogue, one to many. And instead of having to look at people and say, oh, that person looks like they're dozing off, or that person looks like they're puzzled, and just trying to figure out while you're speaking, you can just get the information, boom, straight back. And so another thing that I absolutely love to do is just have the chat open when I'm keynoting virtually. And I know that some people get distracted by that, or they don't like to pause and say, oh, Johnny in Madrid, love the comment that you just made about da-da-da-da-da, right? But for me, that's another way of not only serving people, because people love it when you call them out during a session, but also really showing that you're not afraid to get into it with people. And it's not this kind of veneer of, well, I've rehearsed every word, and if I get interrupted, I'm going to lose my train of thought and I can't. But it's more, this is real. I really want to influence you. I really want to hear from you. I can weave your comments into what I'm saying and also be informed, because I see it as a way for me to learn from the audience. I don't know everything. So if I'm sharing an experience I might have had, I might say, well, drop in the chat. What if, oh my gosh, that happened to you? And then it's fodder for another keynote, right? Where somebody said this thing and I can then share it. So I see the more interaction, while it started out for me as being a way to deflect attention away from me or to have a breather, I now see it as a way to genuinely be in it with the audience and truly understand what they're going through and also the impact of my talk on them. So if you say, well, what do you think of that? And nobody drops anything in the chat at all, maybe it didn't land, right? Versus you do keynote and it's not until, minute 50 or the Q&A that you get some sort of decent feedback from the audience. So I don't know what you think about that. You doubtless do virtual events as well as in person.
Yeah, and I really do like virtual events, because a lot of the virtual events I do are more interactive, more intimate rounds where I moderate conversations, and people do really love the opportunity to just share. So sometimes, especially at the beginning, I have started, instead of me, ticking off a list of questions, I will ask a question and then I say, who'd like to go first? Is anyone who has a particular view on this? And or say, for example, one attendee has spoken, I might say, what does everybody else think about that? Do you have any questions for, I don't know, Antonia? So I think the interactive piece and really steering away from, I have to have this perfect, glossy, polished presentation, I need to look good, to we are humans and let's keep it real. And realness means imperfection. So and the same that happens online and offline. So the virtual piece, I would say virtual can be really powerful. But saying that, obviously you talked about virtual versus in person, and I'd be curious to know in terms of perhaps the differences of how you prepare for them, and maybe are there any questions from anybody watching us today? Because we've gone over time, haven't we? But it's quite an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and there've been some great comments actually from people in the audience, and the reason I haven't taken them as I've gone along is just so that we can record our conversation in a block, and then we can deal with the Q&A in just a moment. So if anyone does have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But yeah, in terms of preparation, I tend to, as I say, make my sessions interactive anyway. But if I'm doing a virtual session, I will add many more interactive pieces to it, because that interaction can go on while I'm speaking. So I'll ask people a question and I'll say, right, and I'll take a few answers, and then I'll say, well, continue on because your colleagues are reading this. This is a way to get the conversation going. You can use this as hooks afterwards, after I'm done. Continue on, but obviously I've only got a certain amount of time with you, so I need now to carry on with my keynote. So I will probably make sure, if I'm doing let's say a 1 hour long keynote that's virtual, I will have probably 3 chunks of content, at the end of which there'll be some sort of opportunity for reflection and sharing. And I'll make sure, because not everybody wants to put deep stuff in the chat, right? I remember one speaker who I was in a Facebook group, and he said, well, we were talking about this, I don't know, maybe it's mental health or something. And I was saying to people, well, put down your mental health challenges in the chat. No one put anything. Like, come on, right? Give me a break. So you've got to ask people the right questions. Either you ask something where they can just do red, yellow, and green. How do you feel you rate on this thing? 1 to 10, red, yellow, green. If you're saying to people, well, this is an example. Are you an introvert, extrovert, or ambivert? 1 introvert, 2 extrovert, 3 ambivert. Put a number in the chat, 1, 2, 3. And I always say, if somebody's leaning back, they're on the sofa eating French fries, have got the laptop on their knee, can they still somehow participate online in Shola's event? So if it's just tap one key here and there, boom, I'm happy that you're still doing that, because you're still taking something away. So I have more interactive sections in a virtual keynote than, of course, in a real life one, because every time if you've got an audience of, say, 100 people, you've got to stop them for, you've got to introduce the interactive piece, tell them how it's going to work, who's going to go first, how long they've got, start them off, stop them. Right, you can't do too much of that in a 1 hour session. Whereas with virtual, the barrier to getting involved is so low that you can just have stuff going on all the time. And I think, although some people might say, well, they should be listening to you, people will absorb your content in their own way. Some will just kick back and listen. Some will want to interact, and that's up to them. But let me give them some options, because most people now have short attention spans, and I want to make sure that they can get as much as they can from that time with me.
Absolutely. And you can do a lot of the stuff in person as well. You just have to tweak it a little bit, rather than red, green, or whatever you can say, put up your hand if whatever, or, tell us how many of you think ABC, so yes, no question. So there are still ways that you could translate that to a in-person setting for sure.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I sometimes in person I'll say, put your hand up if you've done this, or put your hand up if you, and then every now and again you get these, oddball comments in the surveys, and someone said, well, you know what, there was too much put your hands up. I don't
Okay.
but I guess if you don't want to put your hand up, you just keep your hand down, right? But
Yeah.
I love doing surveys. It's good because it really just keeps you humble, because you might have thought, yeah, I did a great job, and then you get someone with some really acerbic kind of negative comment. And we were talking about this before, weren't we, and how you can't allow the comments to stop you from doing the thing that you do, because if it's one person out of 50 that says, I don't like the fact that you advertised your email newsletter in the survey, so be it. Sorry, you didn't like it, but 49 people didn't complain. So there's the balance of how you treat feedback. Do you really let it get to you, or do you just say, okay, I'll take this, I'll discard that, etc.
I think one last point to that is we can learn as humans to train ourselves to not be attached to what people are going to do or not do. Are people going to like me? Am I going to grab their attention or not? Etc. 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 So when we're attached to a certain response from the audience, then we're almost giving our power away. So go on that stage and don't be attached to a particular outcome. So what people have or have to not do. If people don't, give you negative feedback, learn from that, and then move on to the next experience. In that sense, it's all a learning experience. It's not, oh, you did this wrong, I failed. It's really just reframing of how we think about speaking.
Yes, yeah. I've got the ticker on here in case there are any questions. We've had a good amount of responses in the chat, and I know there is typically a lag. There's, I think, a 5-minute delay between what we're saying and when it appears on LinkedIn. So I'm mindful of that. Let's see if there's anything else. I know we've got our list of questions here.
Yes, I can ask you. I have another question for you, actually, if you want.
Okay, go on then. And then maybe we'll close after that. Go for it.
So let's say you have advice to give for people, introverts, who have to give presentations, whether that's for work or maybe they want to do more public speaking in order to accelerate their career. What advice do you have for them? Are there any particular strategies, also in terms of how they can manage their energy better? Let us know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think one thing that can come up is that we can give people too much information sometimes. And this I find in particular with women, where we want to be really earnest and, oh, I've got to do this thing, so I'm going to give them everything. And part of our job as speakers is we have to be selective and think about what is best for this audience. I can't give them everything. Whether it's the most entertaining, the most impactful, the most relevant, and be okay with that, with them not having every single thing. So I think that is one thing to think about, and typically, and also to think about not only the content but the delivery, because again, people will think about content for ages and then they'll practice for half an hour before they go on. And I've got my kind of speaker coach hat on now, because I used to do a lot of speaker coaching. Some people will not be interested at all in the content, but they're more turned on or off by the way that you deliver it. So it's really important to even if the content is the reason you're there and you want to serve, etc., serving well is not only about just here's all these raw ingredients, right? It's how do you cook the meal up so that people think it's tasty, and they want to come back to your restaurant again. So I think that's another really important point. not that you have to start thinking it's about style over substance, but style is as important as substance. There was one speaker, a speaker coach, she talked about steak and sizzle. And a lot of people think it's all about the steak, but sizzle can be important as well. So I would certainly say that, think about that. I would also use your powers of focus to find hooks. So typically as keynoters, we might break a keynote into 3 sections and then find one hook or a word, or, be curious, be calm, be connected, the 3 C's, or just some scaffold, if you like, so that it's easier for people to remember your presentation. And I think when we are a bit obsessed with giving all the content we possibly can, we forget about the scaffold, we forget about the packaging. But if you want people to take something away that is memorable, you can't just bombard them with info. You've got to arrange it properly. And that can be part of the fun, to be honest, because once you've found your hook, you can really enjoy, how you put the meat on the bones. And so if you're not enjoying the bit about being in front of people, you can enjoy the planning, the thought, but you have to give yourself enough time to really get into that and to do it properly.
You're a great coach. Can people book in with you? Got some really valuable input.
Yeah, ironically, it's funny because I actually stopped coaching because I find that the one-to-many is more, I find it more efficient, actually, because I think as an introvert, we're often concerned with energy management. And the idea of doing a one-to-one session in an hour, whereas I could do 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 500 or 1 to 30, that's so much more efficient for me in terms of making an impact. And so that's kind of why I stopped coaching. But actually, a shameless plug coming up, I do have a book that's it's already written and I got a publishing contract for it, but I want to modify it and make it a bit more introvert friendly. So I've got that hopefully coming up in the next couple of months. But yeah, if you do need some basic tips, feel free to get in touch. I can direct you to one of my books or a podcast or something like that. So we didn't have any questions, and I'm mindful of the fact that it's 10:02 and you have another session to moderate later today, don't you, Munia? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to stay on for a bit longer. I don't mind. I'm enjoying this. So
good. I am as well. I really am. But yeah, I'm not seeing any questions. So before we break, I'd love, Munia, for you to get a chance to share a little bit about your how people can find you, what perhaps you can offer. So what we'll do is when we do the summary document with the high level notes from each of these 5 sessions, we will of course include people's links, how, web address, all that sort of thing. But if there's somebody is like, I need Munia now, right? What would you say to them? How would they get in touch? What can you offer?
I would say just send me a PM on LinkedIn and just tell me what you need and what your thoughts are and how I can help you. You can also send me an email to info@muniabg.com, but I think LinkedIn is perfectly fine. I mean, I used to coach, but I don't coach anymore. I think I'm pretty much open to anyone if they want to have advice. You can send me a message and ask. I love moderating events. So obviously this is what I do for a living. I moderate conferences, in-person conferences and virtual conferences. I do interviews. So if anyone wants to do a format like this, I mean, why not? So yeah, I'm somebody who always likes to meet new people and learn and connect and find synergies to work with.
Wonderful. And I certainly feel like, as I say, I just feel like you've been a really sensitive person as a moderator. And so I'd say to anybody, if they want to be a better moderator, then reach out to Munia, because she's so experienced and she can certainly give you a few tips and insights as well. So I'm mindful of the fact I was telling people that this would be a 40-minute conversation. We've gone over time a bit, but I've really, really enjoyed this. And I feel like we've discussed some things that often don't get discussed, like, you know, the benefits of panels, or, you know, being a panelist versus being a keynoter and so on. And it looks as though from the audience, just calling out some people in the audience who are here, or who were here at least. So Elliot, who I met at an event, who is a keynoter and has made a few comments here. Thank you for those. Beatrice, Christy, Gaynor, Vinci. So thank you to all of you for your comments as well. And as I say, if you do want the notes from today, I feel like there was lots of good stuff that was discussed. So just go sign up at info@Shola Kaye, at sholakaye.com/introverts. And from Minia and I, Minia, would you like to say goodbye to the audience?
I didn't, because we can't see the live comments here, so I didn't get to see any of those comments. I don't have my link to in, but I just want to say thank you for listening. I just want to say thank you to you, Shola, as well, for the invitation. And I want to encourage anyone, whether they're introverted or extroverted, just to be yourselves. There's so much role playing out there, so much distraction, so much pretense. And we really, I think we're all yearning to have that humanness and to really just be allowed to be ourselves, especially in the business world. Just take off that mask and don't be afraid to be imperfect, because that's who you really are. So anyone can be a powerful speaker. It just takes a little bit of practice. So just don't be too hard on yourself. It's a learning experience, and you learn from your mistakes. So anyone who wants any more input or advice, just message us, or me, or anyone. Okay, Shola. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I love this conversation. Thank you, audience. And yeah, we keep in touch, and we'll say goodbye here. Thanks ever so much. Bye.
Bye.